Hey, my name is Gabby. My group and I will be covering the topic of all-nighters. We'll be diving into the reality of pulling all-nighters. I will be starting with talking about the physiology behind sleep and the absence of it. So sleep on a physiological level, we'll start with the circadian rhythm. What is it? It's our body's 24-hour time clock. This is how our brain regulates our sleep and wake cycles. We'll also talk about some of the organs involved and the roles that they play in sleep. So to begin, our eyes, the retina is located in the back of the eye, and it is the location of millions of photoreceptors. These photoreceptors are cells that are responsible for receiving light rays and then transducing these light rays into an electrical impulse that is then sent to our brain so that we can perceive the level of light in our environment. So obviously in a low light environment, or when it's dark outside, when it's nighttime, our hypothalamus eventually receives this information saying that it's nighttime or it's dark. And in receiving the low light level information about the environment, the hypothalamus will signal the pineal gland or the pineal body to then convert serotonin into melatonin, our body's main sleep hormone, which obviously will promote sleep. The hypothalamus also will produce or secrete the neurotransmitter that we know as GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. This neurotransmitter, it reduces neuronal activity. So it pretty much helps the brain achieve a state of calmness that can help us further fall asleep. And when it reduces neuronal activity, one of the other organs involved, the thalamus, its activity is also reduced. And so when its activity is also reduced, it helps to maintain the sleep state. So the thalamus is the main relay station of sensory information for the brain. So when its activity is reduced, we're not as aware of external stimuli in our environment. So we're less likely to wake up when the thalamus's activity is reduced. So again, it helps us maintain that state of sleep. The brainstem, it consists of the midbrain, the pons, the medulla. It also consists of the reticular activating system, but for presentation's sake, I'm going to kind of separate them just to talk about them separately. But the brainstem, it initiates the REM stage of our sleep, the rapid eye movement stage of our sleep. It promotes atonia, so it helps our muscles to relax, kind of almost like paralyze them so that we're not acting out our dreams while we're sleeping and hurting ourselves or anybody around us. And it also helps to maintain normal respiratory function as well. And then the reticular formation or reticular activating system, this is triggered. The role that it plays in our sleep process is it's triggered by the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus plays an additional role in our sleep process, not in just initiating the sleep process, but in also initiating the wake part of the process. So once the hypothalamus receives more information about the level of light in the environment, so as it gets bright outside, as the sun rises, obviously our eyelids are still closed while we're sleeping, but they don't block all of the light rays. So there's still some light rays that make their way to the retina. The retina, same thing, will transduce these into electrical impulses, since the brain basically communicating, hey, it's bright again outside. And when the hypothalamus receives this information, it will then trigger or send a signal to the reticular formation to release the neurotransmitters that are responsible for producing wakefulness. So some of them, acetylcholine, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, these neurotransmitters will be released by the reticular formation in the presence of light levels increasing again. So as the sun raises, they may also not necessarily be triggered by the level of light. For those of us who typically our routine consists of waking up before the sun's up, so waking up before the level of light in our environment is increasing and it's still dark. The reticular formation can still release those neurotransmitters in order to promote wakefulness, because the hypothalamus does a good job at regulating our sleep and wake cycles. So especially as we maintain some sort of regular sleep routine and waking routine. So, when we go to work every day at the same time and we kind of fall asleep every day around the same time or go to sleep, our brain learns this pattern and it's able to kind of promote these sleep and wake cycles based off of our normal pattern. So even if there's not necessarily a bright environment that triggers us to wake up and it's still dark outside, our hypothalamus is able to keep up with that routine and still do its job in initiating the wake process again. And then something that I think is interesting, because I'm biased in the ophthalmology field, our eyes. So obviously, the eyes play that role of providing the information to the level of light in our environment. But for people who are blind, which the medical definition of blind is no light perception in the eye. A lot of times, blindness people they think about it subjectively, so they think, oh, if I can't see 2 feet in front of me, I'm blind. But the medical definition of blind is no light perception being perceived at all. So whether it's due to corneal damage, retinal damage, optic nerve damage, whatever damage is done that results in the eye losing the ability to even perceive light, this person is then completely, totally blind. And a lot of times in people who are completely blind, obviously they've lost that ability to perceive light, and so they are at a increased risk of developing sleep disorders, because they don't receive any information about the level of light in their environment because they can't. So they'll oftentimes have sleep disorders. They oftentimes don't have the same 24-hour time clock or circadian rhythm that we have. Their time clock kind of shifts more and more, and so eventually it can lead to them being awake at night and asleep during the day. So it's an interesting thing that can result from losing the ability to see. Next, we'll talk about why sleep is so essential. So sleep serves many different functions. We'll talk about the levels of functions that they serve on a biological and physiological level. Our brain will use sleep to carry out different physiological processes. So one of those processes is molecular clearance. Molecular clearance is the brain's ability to remove toxins and metabolic waste that have accumulated in the brain. And we'll talk about on the next slide why that's so important. But for this slide's sake, we'll continue on the different functions. Our brain also utilizes sleep as a time to carry out neural reorganization or neuroplasticity. And this is our brain's ability to change or grow the structure and function of different neural networks that we have. And a lot of times this is in response to learning, to experiences that we have throughout our day, to injury. So it's a very complex and important ability for our brain to have. It also uses sleep to carry out memory consolidation, so converting short-term memory into long-term memory, which is really important, for those of us who are studying for exams. This is why it's so important for us to get sleep and not pull these all-nighters, because we're basically kind of taken away our brain's ability to commit all of the things that we've studied for the day or for a few days, commit it to our long-term memory so that we've actually learned it and not just memorized it in that moment and then data dumping it, the next day or whatever the case is. And then another physiological process is it strengthens our immune system. A lot of the cells that are responsible for fighting off infection, they're produced while we sleep. So if we're having chronic sleep deprivation, a lot of times can result in a weakened immune system as well. On a mental level, which all of mental, emotional, physical, there's a physiological process behind all of those, but for conversation's sake and presentation's sake, I do want to separate them. So it also serves functions on a mental level. So sleep is extremely important for cognitive performance. Our cognitive performance in our day-to-day lives relies heavily on the amount of sleep that we've gotten and the quality of sleep that we've gotten. And this is really evident I believe for most of us, I would think. I know that when I work in the medical field, and I know that when I go to work off of 8 hours of sleep, I feel a lot more refreshed and ready to get through the day, as opposed to when I'm going to work with 2 to 3 hours of sleep. Just very groggy. I notice I make more mistakes than I would, which is obviously a very, very important topic in the medical field because medical errors are such a huge contribution to damage being done to patients. And so when we talk about how important sleep is at a mental level, it's very important to be able to provide quality healthcare to patients. And it plays a direct role it can play a direct role in that. So it is very important. On an emotional level, it also helps us basically process our emotions, regulate our stress levels, stabilize our mood. This is, regardless of what field you work in, this is very apparent because we tend to all be pretty grumpy when we haven't gotten a good night's sleep. And so we have less patience, we're more irritable. This leads to a less emotionally stable level for ourselves. And this is all just because we didn't get a good enough night's sleep. So it's very important as well. And then on a physical level, our brain while we sleep does a lot of repairing of damaged tissues, repairing and recovering damaged tissues. So anybody who works like labor intensive jobs, anybody who is interested in their physical fitness, they go run every day or they go to the gym. A lot of times those muscle fibers, they're being damaged, they're being tore while we're working out, especially if you're lifting weights. And so our brain utilizes the sleep period to repair those, muscle fiber tears and recover the body from the physical stress that it endured throughout the day. So this is really important because this can be the difference for someone in the gym who's looking for certain results, whether it's bulking or whatever. Could be the difference between the amount of muscle that's grown versus in a certain amount of time versus in somebody who has poor sleep habits versus someone who has very routine and regular sleep habits. Those two groups could have big differences in between the results that they see, regardless of training, because of the amount of sleep. So it's very important on a physical level as well. And then lastly, I will talk about the effects of sleep deprivation at a physiological level. So there's a study that I'll explain here in a second, and it basically establishes the fact that sleep deprivation impairs molecular clearance from the brain. So we talked about molecular clearance, the brain's ability to remove the toxins and metabolic waste that accumulate. And now we're going to talk about why it's so important. So it's really important because it will help maintain homeostasis in our brain and our body, and then also reduce the risks of neurodegenerative disorders. So like Alzheimer's, dementia, those types of things. A lot of times, sometimes you can see in those patients, especially if it's developed at an earlier age, that they had chronically poor sleeping habits, chronic sleep deprivation. And so molecular clearance is very important in both of those things. So this study, we're going to talk about, simplify it as much as possible for time's sake. So it administered a tracer molecule, which is depicted by the red areas in these scans on the left side of the screen. It administered this tracer molecule to two different groups of people. So group A, they were sleep deprived from day 1 to day 2. And then group B, the people who were allowed to sleep, they were they were allowed to sleep from day to 1 to day 2, and scans were taken of both groups, of the brains of both groups. And as you can see on the top row for the sleep deprivation brain scan, there's more red areas present than in the second row, the group of people that were allowed to sleep. And so what this shows is that there's less molecular clearance. There's reduced molecular clearance whenever sleep deprivation occurs. And furthermore, this study also allowed the sleep deprived group of people to try and catch up on sleep the next night. So day 1, day 2, no sleep. Day 2, day 3, they were allowed to sleep as they normally would. And what it also showed was that one night of subsequent sleep did not make up for either the damage or the lack of processes that could be carried out. It did not make up for that lack of sleep from the previous night. So getting good night's sleep the next night did not make up for the fact that the brain was sleep deprived the previous night. And this is very important because the implications in today's world, we live in such a fast-paced world. Most of us have very busy schedules. And I think I personally, I hypothesize that we'll begin to see more and more we'll see higher rates of sleep disorders, I believe. And I think we'll also start seeing the presence of neurodegenerative disorders at increasingly younger or earlier ages than we would normally see, because as a society, we don't really prioritize sleep, especially within a certain age group. I think, kind of 20s to 30s, sleep is not prioritized. A lot of us are very, very busy. And so I think the implications of that will, start to see higher rates of sleep disorders, higher rates of neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's and dementia developing at earlier ages. So I think it's an area that will need to continue to be studied and will continue to need to improve upon. I know myself, I don't prioritize sleep as much as I should. So it's this, in studying all of this, I think it's made it very apparent that I cannot ignore that, or that we cannot ignore that sleep is a priority. So that concludes my segment of this presentation. My team member, Andy, they will be presenting the physiology of the brain with adequate sleep.